And if I see now our video recording, there are waves, and there are tides up and down, and in the middle also gaps, intervals. And so if you look at life, everything is exactly made from this. This is life. And that is why Buddha said life is suffering. Number one rule to understand, number one thing to understand is life is suffering. And Messenger, or what is it called, Google, and then Google now it works, so it's good.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I should have warned you a little bit earlier that for this platform you need Google Chrome. Yeah, yeah. So it works the best only with Google Chrome browser. Well, nonetheless, I don't know if it's morning with you, but it is morning with me. So I guess good morning, I should say.
Good morning. Your name is Bohdan. Is that how I pronounce you?
Yes, yes.
Bohdan.
Correct.
It's like given. Blessed by God,
yeah,
or something.
God given. Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. I think you might be the first non-native speaker of Ukraine, well, non-Ukrainian native who actually got the name right. How did you get it? Did you know how God is in different ways in different languages?
Well, I speak many languages. I guess that's why, because I speak Japanese, German, English. I can speak Russian and Polish, and I also understand Ukrainian a little bit.
Really?
So and Hebrew, and yeah. So I'm learning Romanian.
Oh, wow, interesting. Now, before we get into the topic of the current podcast, how did you, because I'm an English teacher and that's a relevant topic for my students, how people can even learn so many languages. What's your secret? I'm sure it will be useful for lots of listeners.
My secret is fall in love with the language, with the people.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I've been preaching all these years of teaching. Yeah, that's the shortcut, right?
Yeah, this is how I learned English. Just falling in love with someone. As a teenager, I fall in love with. I think it was a girl from from Iceland, and she.
So you literally fallen in love with somebody, not
yeah, of course.
I don't know what you do and what you listen. Oh, you literally had a crush, right?
That's the fast. If you are looking for the fastest way, yes, have a crush with a person and then speak in that language. Of course, of course. And the second is to fall in love with the language or with the culture and just generally with learning with the people. Love is a very helpful tool. Absolutely.
Yeah, arguably the most important, a lot of people would say, and I've been lately thinking a lot about it. And in terms of getting back to language, just for one more second, how do you maintain the knowledge? Is it always active practice, or do you think once you've learned it to a certain extent, it's like learning bicycle riding? Once you've learned, you can't unlearn.
Well, that's a good question. I think it depends really what you want to do with the language. What do you use it for? Like my Japanese isn't as good as other of my languages. So it really depends. If you're a teacher, then definitely you need to practice. Mm-hmm. If you are a pianist, if you have to perform, of course you need to practice. But if it's just for yourself or for your friends, you don't need to practice as much. And my Japanese is still good. And if I meet a Japanese person, I can still communicate. But it will take time before it gets to the same point as before. So, of course, it takes some time.
Right.
But it really depends what you need the language for. In my case, it's just for bringing the message that I have and the therapy work that I'm doing. So for that is actually enough if you can speak like a child or like a teenager, because if you cannot explain something to your client or to your student in a way that a teenager or let's say,
Bro, you
like a
just take
child
it
understands.
from me. Yeah, that's one
Yeah.
idea I've been always pushing to my students. If you
Yeah.
can't explain something simplistically, you probably don't understand it enough, right?
Yeah, that's what Einstein said. Probably someone else before him also said that. So that is why I think for me it doesn't matter anymore, or it was never important. Like German is one of my main languages, but when I was young or younger, I was trying to become very like intellectually way of being able to speak intellectually, but then I realized that this is not what I want. I want
Mm.
people to understand me. I don't want to stand above people.
What
And
was the point
so
of
in
trying
that
to
moment,
speak a little bit more elaborately? Why did you want to speak like that in the first place, you
because
think?
I
Was it?
wanted to stand above other people. That's why.
Mhm,
I want to be intellectual, right? So if you are intellectual, there is a need for you to stand outside, right?
mhm,
So if you have nothing else, okay, that's okay. Like in Germany, you study Kant, for example. And in order to understand Kant, you need to study not just the language German, which you have to study Kant, the language of Kant himself, which he created his own language, right? So that's something I really find unnecessary, because
uh-huh,
why would I teach philosophy if I don't want people to actually understand it?
mhm.
So for me, it's something that has to be practical. It has to be easily applicable, and therefore, yeah.
So you're saying that philosophy in its core must first and foremost be easy to understand. It should not complicate people, right?
Well, philosophy in itself is, by definition, complicated, so and complex. So it is okay for me if philosophers do what they do. That's their job. You know, it's like a doctor who speaks in a specific kind of language. That's how it is done, and some people find it necessary, and there might be even some meaning to that. But in my philosophy, in the way I teach, yes, but not generally. I would not say that philosophy should be like that or like this, or philosophers should do this or that. No, that's not for me to say. Absolutely not.
Well, so yeah, I'm very tempted to dash into all of our upcoming topics. I can't say that I am too privileged with a lot of time, but I think we will do our absolute best to unveil as many topics as possible. Before we start, how do you define yourself? How do you introduce yourself to people who are not familiar with you?
Well, preferably I don't define myself at all, nor I introduce myself. I prefer if people introduce me. But if I have to introduce myself, well, my name is Jion, and I work as a therapist focusing on trauma, but generally working with anything you have in your life you want to work on. Besides, if you have like a really heavy disposition, let's say psychosis or schizophrenia or borderline, something like that, I don't work with that. But anything else, like mild depression or anything, trauma, PTSD, that's where my focal point is. And I connect therapy work with spiritual work, with Zen, with the practice of Zen and with the philosophy of Zen, with the psychology of Zen to one. So my specialty is really that connection between therapy work and Zen practice. That is me.
Do you feel sometimes like this term Zen gets thrown around too much, and a lot of people may not entirely understand what it means when they say certain things? A lot of people refer to Zen as to some sort of a state of bliss, to some kind of nirvana in a way. Correct me if I'm wrong. What would you say regarding that?
Yeah, it's a word. Like every word, it is used. And that is why my work, the first thing I do is to look at definitions. So
Mhm,
to work out the definitions, because even the slightest things that we talk about, even the simplest words that we use, often we have a different understanding of what we mean by them.
mhm,
So let's take a word like mind. For many people, the mind is when I say the mind, they think about the thinking. So that thinking, that is the mind, what thinks. In Zen, the mind is not just what thinks. Sometimes when we say the mind in Zen, what we mean is the very enlightenment, the great mind, or like the universe, the mind of the universe, or
God.
in Japanese, mind is connected with the heart. So there is no disconnection between mind and heart in the Japanese language. It's shin, and the kanji for shin, the hieroglyph for shin, is actually the same for heart. So we have to work on definition first. We have to really question the little things, and then we build up from there. And then we can have a mutual understanding, because from the Zen perspective, we cannot even share a fart with each other, it is said. So we have to really first build up a platform on which we can understand each other and not just speak and through each other or away from each other.
I feel like a lot of people during communication do not tend to listen, but tend to mostly speak. Have you maybe noticed anything like that? A lot of people partake in conversation not with the purpose of hearing the interlocutor, but just to let them speak. So when your therapist starts, is establishing definition a part of it? Do you tend to, in early sessions, in first sessions, be clear about what means what? Is that part of your practice?
Yes, but by questioning the definition that we have, not by indoctrinating my definition. It's not about indoctrination. It's about unlearning, unschooling. So whatever you tell me, you can just tell me about your day, and I will find things which I will then put into question for you. And so you can explain it to me, what you mean by it. And then with time, we find common ground. And then the next step is I will give you maybe some things that you can practice. And then you will make mistakes with that for sure. And then from that mistakes, I will better understand what you understand, when I told you to do this or that, and how you actually misinterpreted what I actually told you. And so then that way I understand you better, and then I can, it's a team effort. So we can work better together then.
And what spiritual practices do you normally advise, recommend to your clients, perhaps, if any? What would be useful for somebody on average, if you don't mind speaking about that?
Never mind. So the main spiritual practice for me, the base of spirituality to me, is really to question things. So like you do. So to really question, what is it? What is spirituality? What is life? Who am I? And nothing else. If my son would ask me, Papa, what is, he's still not speaking. So one day, if he will ask me, Papa, what is spirituality? I will tell him, spirituality is exactly that, to ask the question, and not to know, but to ask, to live in the question, to become the question. So anything that is like spirituality is this, or spirituality is that particular practice, or that belief, or that system, that is to me not spirituality. That's not Zen. Zen is really about living in that question and in that state of I know that I don't know. I know that I know nothing. Ich weiß, dass ich nichts weiß. So in German, so I know that I know nothing. It's not a knowledge. It's a state of mind in which you enter when you allow yourself not to know, but at the same time being curious about wanting to know. And in that state, you start to just expand, and you start to realize, wow, I'm bigger actually than just this little self. So it's really about this. And if you just practice that, of questioning whatever you believe, whatever you think, whatever you think to know, if you just do that, you will enter into a deep state of meditation. But if you don't do that as a base in your practice, then what happens is you just encompass what you already know. And even if you meditate for many hours, what happens is you just become stronger in your
Your beliefs.
self-centeredness, in your beliefs, in your spiritual ego. And that is what we see a lot, right? So, but yeah, and so this, my work is really, that is why it's so important also to connect spirituality and meditation. Because if you have a mental state, if you're traumatized, if you're conditioned, right, by society, by trauma, imprinted by trauma, by abuse, whatever happened to your life, and we all, to all of us happened life, something happened to us, even if not to us, to our parents, to our grandparents, you know. So it's transgenerational trauma, is a national trauma, right? Whatever is in us, imprints of trauma, and all of that creates a frame, and through that frame we're seeing the world. And so if I meditate for hours and hours through that frame, whatever I perceive, whatever experience of enlightenment awakening I will have, it is still through that frame. And that's the problem. And it's very difficult to see that frame because we are identified with it. We identify with the trauma. We identify with our nation, with our trauma, with our soccer team, whatever you identify with, and we see the world through that identity, and that creates our world. And so it's like, it's very difficult for us to see ourselves beyond that frame. And so Zen is really about to penetrate through that frame. But if we have trauma, if we have all that psychological things in us, it is nearly impossible. And that is why Zen teaches that meditation without wisdom is useless. And so therapy is part of that wisdom, is part of creating that wisdom in us.
Now, surely you must have run into a lot of people who do not tend to ask questions and still remain seemingly happy. Have you had any experience with those kind of people?
What can you elaborate a little
Yeah,
bit
I mean
more?
those.
What you
Well,
mean by
so
that?
you've been telling me about the importance of asking questions, of which I completely agree, because I feel it's necessary and crucially important to take some of your firm beliefs and ask yourself why you believe certain things, whether it's something positive or negative. Especially if it's something toxic and negative, it's even more important to ask yourself why you hold such radical, let's say, stance on certain things. But what about people who do not ask? What about people who do not tend to look inside, but still remain seemingly happy? Have you had any experience with this type of people, and what you make of it?
Well, those people don't come to therapy nor to meditation usually, right? So rarely I experience them in my own life. But of course, when you look into, I'm not ignorant, so I see things in social media, in the world. There are people like that. So there are people who do not ask any questions and who are seemingly happy. I actually wrote a whole chapter about exactly this phenomenon in my book, which is not ready yet, but I'm writing it. So, and this is, we call it blissful ignorance, right? And
Yes,
so,
yes.
for people like you and me, I assume you are a very highly sensible, sensitive person, from what I perceive and from your questions. So, it is actually very important to practice blissful ignorance. So
Oh, really?
we have to learn
Practice
that.
it.
We have to practice it. Yes, yes.
So those
Like
people
many people,
surprisingly might be even more developed, right?
not more developed, they are just developed in one particular
Yeah.
subject, that
Yeah.
often people who are overly conscious and overly hypersensitive, sensible, are lacking. So there are things always to learn in each human being. We can find something we can learn from. There is not such. I never met ever a person which I would say, oh, this is absolutely just a evil person or absolutely just a stupid person. I never met such a thing, because I see through it, through the boundaries, through the filters, through the personality, and there is always something deeper in each individual and in the world in
Do you
general.
believe?
So, mhm.
Do you believe in free will?
In general, I don't believe in anything. So, neither in free will. Free will is an interesting concept. So, uh, of course, we have to practice free will. Of course, it's
As if
important for
it's
us to
real.
have that. Yeah, yeah, of course, and it is important. It depends on what progression you are on in that moment of your life. So it depends on the person. I would say yes, you need to practice to have free will, and some people I would say, now it's time for you to surrender and to feel how life is flowing through you and how life works, universe, whatever, God, whatever you believe in or feel connected to, moves through you, and experience that. So
To
free
allow
will
life to happen
is,
to you.
yeah, so free will is existent, but then you have to ask yourself, who is the one who is choosing? What
Hmm.
is it in you which makes the choice? And there are several different answers to that, because there is a psychological answer which states that most of our choice is made by our unconsciousness.
Hmm.
So only a little fraction of our choices is actually our conscious choice. And then if you go further then into the spiritual realm, then you have to ask, what is the conscious? Who is making the conscious choice? What is that? Right? So question that. It's like looking through a microscope until you, wherever, if you look in space with a telescope, you see that it's just space is just infinite, it seems. And if you take a microscope and you look at the smallest thing possible, you see also that infinity. So you always
Hmm.
come to that point of infinity, no matter how you look,
And
where you look.
have you reached any definite conclusion though regarding this concept of free will? Because I understand, I think, according to what you've been saying, it seems like searching for the answer might be the answer itself, right? And remaining in a constant state of search is what gives certain purpose and like certain idea to your life, right, to the existence. But isn't it nice for you as for a practitioner to finally land somewhere, to finally reach a certain conclusion and be certain about a certain aspect of life? You know what I'm talking about? Because yeah, I feel like it requires good experience and flexibility of your mind to remain humble enough to say, I don't know and I don't believe. Like you said, you don't believe in a lot, but don't you want to sometimes have certain answers to certain questions? Or are you permanently in a state of constant growth and transformation, if that makes any sense?
Well, the realization of awakening is that we are all one. And so, as much as awakened I can be, I'm also very much unawakened, like everybody else. So, the awakening state sometimes gives us the illusion that we are above everybody else, or that we are better, or that we have a higher state or higher vibration. But that's an illusion of awakening in itself. So, we call it the stink of Zen. So once we go deeper, then we realize that no matter how awakened we are also all the ignorance in the world at the same time. The only difference is that you can see it, and that you can see it with compassion
Mhm.
and not judgment and not ignorance and also not blindness to it.
Mhm.
So what you have said was looking for, like, searching. I did not say that it is important to search. What I have said is it's important to question. And question not necessarily means that you're searching. Question, as I have described, and you see, this is where definition is so important. Question to me means to be in that state of I don't know mind, and it's a very specific state. It's a kind of a flow state, which I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. When you do something with utter, you forget yourself and you find yourself within what you are doing, so, or not doing. It can happen in meditation, but it can also happen in anything else in your life. And so it's a kind of a state of that, and it's not a searching. It's not like, oh, I'm searching for something. The searching is only the beginning. In the beginning, we all search for something. And so, and in the spiritual journey, of course, if you don't have a search, then you will not look into spirituality. So it starts with a searching, but that is not the end. The being in the question is actually an utter state of finding, but it's not like you found something. It's a feeling of it's like being in that positive flow. It's like it doesn't matter if you found something, because the goal is not it's not the goal anymore which counts. It's the walking on that path which is the goal, which becomes the goal. And so you arrive, but at the same time, you are okay of being everywhere and nowhere with that.
So it's not about destination, so to speak, it's about the journey, right?
Yes, in the way, that's exactly what it is. Mm-hmm.
Would you say that could be the life purpose? To explore, to enjoy the process as much as we can, other than thinking of what happens after we go.
Life purpose, to me, in my work, is what you experience at this very moment. Whatever you experience and experienced in your life, that's your life purpose. That is the only thing I can say with as a truth, as something, as a fact, because nobody can say, well, my experience is actually not real. Whatever you experienced or experience, that is real to you. And so if you experienced to eat a banana, then this is the experience you need in your life, and nobody can argue with you about this. Nobody can take away that experience from you. Whatever experience you made in your life, that to experience that was and is your life purpose. If I tell you your life purpose is to live your potential, or to become the next president of the United States, how I cannot know that. And first of all, and second, well, you will always look for something else. You will never arrive at where you are in this very moment. So in my work, it's very important that we arrive at the moment where we are, because how can you work on yourself? How can you discover yourself? How can you understand deeper wisdom, life in itself, if you are not arriving at where you are at this very moment?
Do you think a major source of unhappiness for a lot of people is because they haven't realized this thing, what you've just said, that they haven't arrived to themselves and they haven't, so to speak, found themselves? Do you think that's a noticeable factor in unhappiness and spiritual numbness with a lot of people?
I'm always careful with talking for lots of people, and I still do that mistake all the time. So, but if, in generally speaking, I prefer to speak from my own life. So, in my own life, I was unhappy because I was lacking something, and I didn't even know what it is. And I felt, okay, so you have a job, you have work, you have family, you make money, you have a career, you learn something, and so what? What's next? And then you die. And then you lose everything. Your wife dies. Your husband dies, your child maybe dies. What is the purpose? What is the meaning of this? Why would I um, do all of this if in the end it's all impermanent? It will go anyway. What is death? Why am I alive? How can it be that the universe is infinite? All these questions were to me very important for whatever reason, because that's the way I was born. So, and I was depressed because I couldn't answer that questions. So everyone has their own reason for being depressed. There are people who are depressed because they just don't get what they want. They don't get the car they want, or they don't get the free time from their boss, or they don't get the partner that they would like to have, or whatever. So then they are unhappy, and when they get what they want, then they become kind of happy, right? So everyone has their own reason to be happy and unhappy. But one of the major reasons also to be unhappy is when we are striving to be happy, when we are addicted to happiness itself. So rather than really feeling ourselves, facing our lives, taking on the things that we can change, we are just losing time about being unhappy and just trying to be happy. And that makes us a lot of unhappiness is created by trying to be happy. But then again, it is important to look for it. It is important to try to look for answers and to question. But we have to question the very idea of happiness. What is happiness? Why am I trying to be happy? What is happiness? What is that? What does it
Yeah, like
mean?
for example, if there's certain thing that you're striving for, it makes sense to ask why exactly you want that thing. What exactly will change on your almost psychologically emotional level if you've got that thing, if you reach that thing, why you need it. And do you think happiness can come to you in a form of a relatively permanent state, or do you think these are just like flashlights, just like flashes that come and go? And maybe the reason why a lot of people feel dissatisfied is because they want that flash to prolong for a bit more time. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. So, what you define with that flashes is already a predefinition for a certain type of happiness.
Mm,
So, in that system, what you describe, that type of happiness is, unfortunately, we don't have any different names for different types of happiness. Like there are different names in the Greek philosophy for love, for example, like agape, right? But we don't have that in our language, in English. And so I work just with the system that you just described to me. And in that system where we have that waves, we have to understand that yes, that type of happiness comes in waves. It comes in tides, and there are intervals of stillness, and then there are waves of peaks, height, and then there are also lows. And if I see now our video recording, there are waves, and there are tides up and down, and in the middle also gaps, intervals. And so if you look at life, everything is exactly made from this. This is life. And that is why Buddha said life is suffering. Number one rule to understand, number one thing to understand is life is suffering, and we have to face it. We have to realize also what suffering actually means. And many people don't understand that what suffering means is oftentimes just ignorance, that we in the moment when we awaken, we realize, oh my God, I was really suffering. I didn't even know that I was suffering. But until then, we think we are pretty good. But when we awaken, we realize how much we actually were suffering. Why is that? It's because when we live through a limited frame, we don't see what's the whole universe. We don't see the whole potential that we are. Not that we can be, which we are at every given moment. And so just that framed reality, take off the frame, suddenly we realize how vast we are. And it's incredible. And it's like, it's so joyful to be in that vastness. And then you see how painful it is to be contracted all the time in that frame. It's like being a bonsai, but the bonsai doesn't know that it could be a tree because it is born that way. It is conditioned by a metal frame of conditioning to be a bonsai. So it will never ask the question. And so part of my work is to give birth to this, to help people to get out of that frame so they can become a fully grown tree. And then suddenly you see, wow, I was actually really suffering. That was for me a realization. I never understood what it means. Why did Buddha stated in the as the first rule of his work, he stated life is suffering? I didn't get it. Because it's obvious, isn't it? Yeah, we are suffering, so what? But then when I awakened in the monastery, when I was in Japan and I had my first awakening, that was like, wow, I didn't know I was suffering so much. Like, how could I not have noticed how much actually I was suffering? So this is very important to understand, that we actually don't even know how much we are suffering.
To a lot of people, the permanent state of suffering has become so, they've become so accustomed to it that they probably think that it's okay. And then something happens, whether it's on purpose or accident, because I think sometimes certain events can happen to you that be so enlightening, that awaken you, but you didn't even plan it previously. They just happened to you on an accident, let's say. And then all of a sudden this pain and trauma and grief is removed. And it's like if your nose has been blocked and now you can freely breathe again. You couldn't believe that you had lived before that way. So,
exactly.
But I would lie if I said that I know how to achieve it. Obviously, now who am I to say?
There is no achieving it, but there is a preparation to it. Actually, awakening is like an accident, and so it happens by accident.
It
never happens by
happen on purpose?
trying.
Never.
No, never. That's the thing. That is the difference between ego-driven coaching or anything and true spirituality. Spirituality is not something you can force upon yourself. It always happens by grace, by accident. But the practice of therapy work and meditation together makes you very much accident prone.
So you can facilitate it, right? Yeah, you can move in certain direction. You can strive for it, right? But whether it happens or not, it's still a bit of fun.
So to be precise, the meditation practice, the Zen practice, that not just prepares you, it concentrates you in that direction of awakening. So awakening becomes more likely to happen at some point when you practice meditation. And the therapy work does the same thing, but what it does another very important thing, which is it frees you, your mind, your psyche, and your body from resistance. And so once you have that awakening, which is not that difficult actually to come to, at some point it happens when you practice, even if you don't practice, it can happen. So, but when you have that awakening, once it comes to you, most of us will not, or let's formulate it differently. What happens often is that you will not record that awakening. So you will have that awakening and it will pass very quickly without that you can actually actualize it or bring it into your life. And so what is the meaning of that? Nothing. It just creates a spiritual ego. You think you had some special experience, now you're special. So the therapy work helps you that your body can actually record that awakening experience and vibrate with it and work with it. and stay with it. If you have too much resistance in your psyche, in your body, in your mind, then what happens is that even though there was an opening, that opening will be very fast closed again, and you will be left from awakening.
Yeah, so to put it simply, a shortcut is very occasionally a good option. Mostly you've got to take the quality road, right? The rich road instead of searching for quick fixes and shortcuts.
Slow cooking is the shortcut.
Yeah. Are psychedelics a part of your practices?
That's a question to me?
Yeah.
All right. So psychedelics is a shortcut. It's not slow cooking. And if you are not ready to face yourself, and if you are not aware of yourself, but you want to have an insight, or let's say you have some terminal illness and you need a quick insight, then maybe psychedelics could be the answer for you. I would not recommend it to anyone though, because many students that come to me are actually went through that process of psychedelics, and then I have to teach them how to ground themselves because they are utterly unable to live in this world anymore, especially after ayahuasca and so forth. Take a lot of times ayahuasca, and then you come back and you feel like you don't belong here anymore. You want to be free of the body, and you start to judge society, you start to judge this world, so you become hypersensitive, hypersensible, and that is definitely not the outcome that usually people want or expect. So these substances are maybe good for those people who are not ready yet to take self-responsibility by using the question, by looking at their trauma consciously. So
would you
even
agree?
if you do,
Yeah,
and I had even clients who were shamans. Like I had clients who were shamans and who learned to be happy with ayahuasca. But then in real life, they were feeling miserable and they had so many traumas, so many problems. They just used the plant to bypass the whole process.
How would you describe a person who is, in your eyes, entirely ready to undergo the process of taking psychedelics like ayahuasca trip or some of those other hallucinogenic, let's call it, substances? Who would, in your eyes, be potentially ready?
Well, if you're ready, then you don't need it. When you're really ready to do it, then it's better to do the slow cooking. It's the ones who are not ready. That's the ones who maybe would fit into that category. If you are truly ready if you're truly ready to surrender, to die, then
you don't need it.
Why do you need it? Just go the slow process. Just do the work. Just enjoy it. And why do you need to have a quick release? If you are ready, then you are also ready to understand that it's the path which is important. It's not the goal to reach some peak. So when you take psychedelics, you reach a peak. You can release maybe certain kind of traumas, but there's many things that are missing. For instance, same like in not well executed therapy work, you can release a trauma, you can release a shadow, but it's not about just releasing a trauma. It's about actually learning from that trauma. And if you just released it and you didn't learn anything from it, then how do you prevent more trauma to come into your life? You don't.
So before you do something about it, you must get yourself familiar with the enemy, so to speak, right?
Well, if you have an enemy, yes, then yeah.
Would you consider a trauma an enemy?
No. Never.
A friend, brother.
Trauma is let's say it this way. If you consider trauma an enemy, then this is actually a trauma response in itself. So it is a trauma response in itself to consider
That's what trauma makes you feel, I think.
Exactly, yes.
What is a healthy attitude to a trauma?
Well, what I teach how to deal with trauma is to realize that the trauma is actually a wave. And through practice, we learn to surf that wave. In the beginning, what happens is when the wave comes, every time it comes, it's like you don't get enough air. You feel suffocated, right? Mm-hmm. The trauma, you get anxious. Oh my God, what happens? And you don't, right? It goes on your throat. It prevents you to breathe, prevents you to be. And so that is the response of trauma when it is triggered. And with time, you realize that you can actually, when that wave comes, you can actually ride it like a surfer. You just have to learn to surf.
So it's not a question whether the trauma comes, right? It will, inevitably, almost. You just have to have the essential skills to get along, so to speak.
So once you can surf, there is no trauma. But if you don't know how to surf and you just try to flatten the wave, okay, then you flattened one wave, you flattened two waves, but you didn't, even if you managed to do that, ideally, you missed out on all the wisdom, on all the gold that could come from it. Because without trauma, there is also no wisdom, no compassion. So trauma is a crucial factor of living, actually. And when I talk about trauma, many people are not even traumatized, but they have the imprints of trauma. So the imprints, you can imagine it's like a stone on a wood. So the wood is your psyche, and the trauma is the stone. So put that stone on that piece of wood for a longer time period. Then take it away, take that trauma away, heal it, whatever, you still have an imprint in the wood. And so that imprint will be part of the framing through which you live, through which you perceive life, and through which you co-create life, your life. So if I am constantly afraid of dogs, then at some point, most likely I will be bitten by a dog, right? Because they can feel it and you're afraid of them. Why? So maybe they get aggressive, then they bite you.
But it's beautiful what you've said about rather having a trauma than not, if I go that correctly, because it's way more valuable and meaningful to have experienced certain painful, although necessary probably thing, other than go through this life unscarred, right?
Yeah, that's what means life is suffering. So because what is suffering is trauma response, fear, abuse, whatever we experienced. And there are micro traumas. The trauma doesn't have to be something huge. It can be very small. But there is always some sort of trauma. When we live, there is some trauma that's unavoidable. And I mean, there are schools like Scientology, for example, which is teaching that if you want to awaken, you just have to be free of trauma. And the best way to raise children is to completely release them from any trauma, not to even have any trauma, like from birth to life, to protect them from any trauma. So the idea in itself is not necessarily wrong, but it comes from a delusional state. Because, as I said, if you, first of all, it's impossible. And second of all, like I said, you are yes, you will be if you have no trauma, you would be in a very kind of more lucid state. That's true. but you would be lucid, like you wouldn't have the character. You would miss out so many shadows, so many different shadows, so many different nuances of yourself, of your character, of your individuality, of wisdom, of compassion. How can you relate to someone in pain if you yourself never experienced pain? Right? So how can you truly deeply, for me, for example, now that I am a father and I can so much more relate to parents and much deeper understand the pain, the struggle of parents. And I could not connect as deep. No matter how enlightened I can be, I cannot connect as deep to someone who has children. I can never really understand that until I have a child. So I don't say that it's impossible and completely impossible. No, I worked with children actually before I had a child and with parents, so I could help them. But now it is much deeper. It's like a different dimension. It's more depth in it than before, for sure.
Certain experiences must be obtained personally in order to speak even about that. Now, let me ask you a question. I've tried my very best to ask certain people this question, and that's something that's kind of low-key bothering me. And I don't know if I can do my best to form it properly, but do you think that it is absolutely necessary to first-hand experience certain things to be able to make your conclusions about them? So in other words, do you think it's absolutely necessary to go yourself through certain things and experiences, or maybe certain possessions even, to then be able to fully say, okay, I don't need it? Or do you think we can say we don't need something even if we've never possessed it?
It's a deep question. I like that question. It's a question that I work with a lot in my life also, and so it has many dimensions. So it's very complex. So what I can say simply is, yes, it is important to have the experience if you truly want to understand the subject. For example, if you want to be a good therapist, it is good if you have the experience of depression. It's good if you have the experience of trauma. If you never had the experience of working on yourself, how can you really be a good therapist? Then again, there are doctors who never experienced certain sicknesses and they still are good doctors. A chirurg can operate you and still never had a broken bone in his body. So the complexity here is that on one hand, it is very valuable, very good, and in certain domains even crucial, like in therapy, to undergo certain experiences. But on the other hand, there is also another dimension, and that dimension is that in that oneness that we are, all experiences and all wisdom is already within us. We are in it. It is in us. And so we can tap into that. And so I can, before I had a child, I can tap into that wisdom and become a parent, even though I never was a parent before. I can relate to it and be compassionate with it to some degree. So before I had an awakening, I already knew what awakening is. Why would I else have looked for it? You don't seek something that you don't have. It's already within you. And so it was already there. And I was sometimes talking about it to people. I wasn't teaching before I underwent my training and really went through a long journey. But yes, I was sometimes talking to people about it already and emphasizing certain things, kind of being sometimes maybe even a teacher or helpful to some people maybe. But without having had deeply that awakening yet. But the awakening was already in me. So there is that saying which is simple: fake it until you make it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
And there is this saying that many people are bothered about, which is the imposter syndrome. So you cannot really understand fake it until you make it when you feel like an imposter. But then what often people do is they try to positively think themselves out of the imposter syndrome by validating themselves, by going to people who validate them, by using positive affirmations: I am best, I am the greatest, I can do it, whatever. That may help like a plaster, but it is not a long-term solution in any way. So long-term, what we need to do is we need to face that part in us, that archetype of the faker, because it's actually an archetype within each individual. In us, it's a psychological archetype energy, the inner faker. And so by facing it and allowing yourself to be a joker, a faker, a player, whatever that energy is in that moment, I start to embrace it rather than resist it and fight it. And so you see that using the wave, riding that wave rather than fighting it or escaping it, right? That's the approach, the same approach here. And so when you do that, when you embrace it, then you can apply fake it until you make it without faking it. You are authentically just trying your best. So like in meditation, when you did not have yet your awakening, if you are fighting the faker in you, if you don't allow yourself to already be awakened in that moment, even though you did not have that experience yet, you will not have it. It will be very difficult for you to have it because you are constantly resisting the experience to come. You're saying, no, I want it real. It has to be real. If it's not real, I don't want it. I'm an imposter. So you're constantly resisting the experience to happen. And we know that dreaming, imagination is a crucial part of creation. If I cannot imagine things, I most likely will not create it either in my life. So it all starts with imagination. All creation starts with imagining. And imagining is in a way faking because it's not real yet, right? I'm imagining it. But it starts with imagination. And if you look at people, all the successful, exactly, it manifests itself that way. And if you look at people who are successful, so to say, whatever success means to you or to people who watch this, because there are different definitions of that, all of them had a dream. All of them had started with imagining themselves in what they do. For me, my dream, my imagination was to be a Zen master and to help people, to be a therapist. So I had that, and that's what happened.
I feel like if something in the future to which one person is going, is striving, does not inspire dreams, wildest, real dreams, bouts of imagination, I don't think it's a worth pursuit in life, and I don't think it's exactly what this person needs, because if it's something truly yours, it must inspire, ignite the spark, right, in soul.
Again, I would always stay with that person. So when I am that person, so if it ignites that spark in me by being nobody and just doing nothing, then this is my way, and I would never question that. And I would never allow anyone else to question that. So we can only speak for ourselves the best. And every person is individual. So if, like Einstein actually said that if he could have a choice, he would rather prefer maybe to just be a simple person working in a hotel carrying bags, because it's so much easier in a way to be happy that way than if you have all that attention of other people. So it really depends on the person. To me, in my eyes, the greatest heroes of this world are those who are the least seen, and that are the nurses, the parents, the mothers, the fathers, who actually really take care of their children and their relationship, which is also very difficult. To have a relationship is a hard work with a child. To have a functional relationship, not just any kind of relationship where you don't see each other and just, it's like helicopter parenting. So that's not what I'm talking. Just like the people who are working in the fields, making the food for us. Just those simple people, the ordinary people who do not bother to be famous or whatever. Those are my heroes. And in a way, this is my life. And this was my life for a long time. I decided at some point that I wish to share more, but not because of myself, but because I just have many fruits and I don't know where to put them. So I just want to give them out, and that's all. And it's nice to share. And if someone comes and say, "Hey, I would like that fruit," well, be my guest. That's all.
How is the sharing been so far, in terms of publicity, in terms of getting yourself out? Have you been satisfied so far? Are you maybe a common guest in some shows, podcasts? You mentioned the book coming out.
Well, it comes in waves. It comes and goes in waves. I had moments when it was very busy, especially because I'm also a singer. So I had concerts before COVID in the group called Bach and Zen, where I would sing and teach meditation, and then we would have also Bach violin music with Iskandar Vijaja, who's a great violinist and famous violinist. And so, yeah, it's good, but it's really my own decision. I decided, being an more introverted person that I am, I decided to just become a little bit more outgoing, and not because I need it, but because I just feel that it's a good time to do that. I don't even know why. It's just that energy is there, and I feel the joy of doing it. And it also, that is the main case actually to me. I learned so much. I learn a lot now, especially now after COVID, and I moved from Germany to Romania. I don't have my group anymore, so I feel like I want to share more, and that is one of the reasons why we meet, because I really feel like this is great opportunity to do that work, to share it. And my book will at some point come out. I work on it 10 years already, slowly, slow cooking. And now I feel it is at a stage where I would be able to release it maybe next year. Yeah. Especially thanks to ChatGPT, because I was waiting for that without even knowing about it, because a lot of my texts are in German and I have to translate that text, and then I have to still find that momentum in that. And so it's a lot of work. I enjoy very much writing, but organization and translation, I'm not the best in that. So thanks to ChatGPT, this helps me a lot. So I can now much easier work on my texts.
You said what language are you writing the book in?
I write it in English, but I have some texts which are in German.
Okay. Are you typing it or handwriting it?
Oh, with my computer.
Yeah, typing it. Right. And I would imagine the book will speak on pretty much general topics, right? Spirituality, kind of spiritual and enlightenment in a way, self-growth. Right?
Yeah, this is one example of that book.
Oh, nice.
You can see it.
Okay, therapist. So what is that? Has that been already published?
No. This, like I said, I had the first edition, which I just published for concerts. When I had concerts, people always like to have something which they could take with them, and so I had that book as an offering. And now I just wait until it is ready. So this book basically has 3 topics. Number 1 is therapy work. Number 2 is Zen and meditation and koan practice. Koans are kind of Zen riddles in simple words, which are meant to open your mind, let's say. Open your mind, open your heart. And there are thousands of koans. So I work on, let's say, 20 specific, most important 20 koans, and I translate them so you can actually understand what it means, because they come from Japan or China, and so they are very difficult to understand for the Western mind. And so I basically even give you the answer for the koans, which is unique. You will not find any book really like that. And because I believe that the answer doesn't matter, you still will have to understand, become the koan. And for a Western mind, which already has a lot of trauma and a lot of things to work on, you don't need to add even more difficulty. That is why I actually already give the answers. And the other thing is the third part of that book, and that is the main book. It's about how is therapy and Zen meditation, koan practice, how is that connecting with each other and how to connect it. And so that is actually the main topic. And so this is a big book, and it's a lot of work, and I enjoy it very much. I don't enjoy so much, like I said, the translation and all this organization. It's not my strength.
Yeah. Well, you are doing undeniably an important work that must be done, and I am sure a lot of people deeply appreciate it. You do receive certain positive feedback, don't you? Does that make you happy when people transform before your eyes and reach certain conclusions thanks to you?
That's a very good question. So I have to answer to you as honest as possible. So that will take a little bit longer answer, of course. So I had for quite a while in my life a resistance to allow people to give me positive feedback, because I was a big critic of myself. I wasn't believing in myself enough, partially because I was traumatized, because I didn't have parents who would do that to me. I'm kind of a self-made man, as much as you can be self-made, of course, because nobody is really self-made. But I did not have that support of a loving mother who tells you, wow, amazing, this is great. Or I didn't have also a father. So I did not have a father physically. So I had to build that. And so it took me quite some time to allow people to give me positive feedback. I was okay with negative feedback, but with positive feedback, that was hard for me to take. So nowadays, yes, I love when people say, hey, that helped me, or it's great. But it's not a food for me. It's just like sweets. I like the sweets, but I'm not eating it. I don't need it. It's not really necessary to me, because on the grand scale, it's not about helping you. It's just about us and working together and just enjoying the journey. So for me, ultimately, when I work with people, I don't really work. For what I see is we go together on a walk. Ultimately, this is what we do. We just go on the mountain hike. And if you, for example, drink a cup of tea, you could just drink water. Why don't you drink water? Why a cup of tea? Why do you need tea? It's just because it's nice to drink a cup of tea and to make a ceremony out of it. There is no particular purpose in it. It's just that utter purposelessness, which is so joyful and beautiful when you just tap into it and allow it to unfold. So the same I see my work. It's not about getting you to some enlightenment or better life. I don't have that goal. But at the same time, yes, of course, I do focus on certain things, on certain topics, and I don't want you to be miserable, more miserable in your life. But then again, in the beginning of our work, most likely you will be more miserable, because in the moment you look at the mirror, you will see all the shadows, all the things that you don't want to see. That is painful. It's a painful process. We call it the dark night of the soul. If you don't have guidance in that, it can take for years. It can take 30 years. Mother Teresa went through it all her life. So you need guidance. When you have guidance, it can take a couple of years, maybe even shorter. But there will be a phase of where it is more painful, where it's a bit more suffering. It increases first before it gets better. And if I am prone to make you feel good or happy, if that is my goal, I will not be a good therapist, if that is my goal.
So the stage of facing your demons, so to speak, is absolutely necessary before you confront them.
And as a therapist, I have to be sometimes a demon. Sometimes I'm a friend, sometimes I'm a father, sometimes a mother, sometimes a child, and sometimes I have to represent that demon, and you will project on me. I will trigger you. That is a stage where it's not in the beginning. I don't do that anymore. I used to do that because I was and still am quite impatient by person. So I used to be very quick. Then I realized that it's better to go slow.
It feels like it's a necessary and critically important facet of every teaching, mentoring person, to not only cherish and appease, but to also represent those elements that are, although painful and unpleasant, but nonetheless critically important, right? And it's essential, absolutely necessary to be able to remind people who want to be reminded of their demons, right, in a professional way. Like, what do you make out of the term a mentor? I've been hearing this term a lot lately, and people tend to have mentors. And I personally, when I hear how some of my students tell me that, oh, I'm looking for a mentor, I feel like looking for a mentor is not exactly a right start to begin with. Correct me if I'm wrong. What do you think about that? Because it feels like, to me personally, mentorship and finding a mentor need to almost happen on accident, And what do you think about that? Do you think one should actively try to find a mentoring person, or do you think it's like a natural outcome of certain spiritual, practices and directions? What do you think?
I think it's both.
Both.
Yes,
yeah.
Of course.
So you feel to be on the right way, but you also must search, right?
If you don't look, you remain ignorant. If you are ignorant, and if you are only looking and controlling that process, you also remain ignorant, because you will never allow yourself to surrender and see that everything is your mentor. What is mentor? What is teacher? What is Zen master? Nothing but a mirror. And it really depends on you. I can be the most clear mirror available. If you have no eyes to see, then you see just yourself, or whatever you want to see. You don't see what I am telling you, what I'm pointing to you at the moon, and all you see is my finger. So I can be the best, greatest Zen master in the world. I point to you on the moon. Look at the moon, how beautiful. And all you see is where? I just see the finger. So why you see only the finger? Because of this, right? The mind is framed, and you just see what you want to see.
Do you think, in comparison with love in relationship, so let's compare looking for a mentor with looking for a partner. To me, looking for a partner feels just as unnecessary, maybe sometimes, as looking for a mentor, because to me, I've always felt like, and that's what happened with my relationship. It's something that's always been there, but one day I've just become, as you said, my narrow vision got a little bit broader, right? And I've sort of awakened to her, literally. And And that's perhaps why when I hear when people say that, oh, I'm looking for a mentor, I feel like, well, should you really look for love, or should you allow love just happen in your life? But at the same time, as you said, it's also right. Certainly, well, it's naive to suppose that certain things will just come to you, like mentoring person or relationship. Do you think love should be sought for and searched for, or do you think it must be allowed, or again, both?
It really depends. It's much more important than seeking or allowing is seeking, looking from within. Because if I seek love, let's say I'm seeking love, but actually my psyche is full of trauma, experienced abuse, and so forth. I did not experience healthy, uh, um, worthwhile relationship in my childhood, let's say, with my parents. Then the love that I will seek and see is usually exactly that what I experienced, because deep down in my subconsciousness, that is what I believe love to be: abusive,
Yeah, you can have
narcissistic. And so whatever I seek, I will just find exactly that. So is that correct? Should you seek or should you not seek? Well, yes, you should seek, but you should look in the right places. There is
and
this
for the right.
Jewish joke, right, where a car breaks down of a person, and a Jewish guy comes out and say, "I can help you, but it will cost you $100." So okay, help me. My car doesn't work, so if you can help me, I will give you $100. So the Jewish guy goes, takes a little hammer, and hammers on one place, and the car works again.
Yeah.
And the guy said, "Well, why are you charging me $100? That's like maybe $1 or so. You just hit on the car." He said, "Yeah, well, you're paying me $1 for the hitting, but 99 for knowing where to hit."
Yeah, that's powerful. That's really, truly powerful. Listen, endlessly grateful for this episode. It's been a fantastic experience. I would want to certainly continue the conversation, and I hope one day we will do it. I think honestly sooner rather than later, because I'd really love to get into your experience. We haven't talked much about your experience of being a monk and staying in those monasteries. So I'd like to really get there to hear you speak of that experience. I'm sure that will be interesting and valuable to a lot of people. Once again, I've got to repeat myself. I've said that to a couple of previous valuable guests. Unfortunately, my audience isn't big enough for people of your of your magnitude in a way, right? Okay, I would just love more people to hear some of my guests. It's really amazing. But nonetheless, thanks for doing it. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Bogdan. And I do not care for how many people you have. So one person is enough.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, that's what I always say. Yeah. But regarding my podcast, I've got that one person who listens all the time, and having that one person is enough. Listen, yeah, thank you beyond comprehension. I will drop it probably in 1 or 2 days, and you will be the first to receive the link to YouTube and to podcast. So via email.